Thank you so much, and thank you for everybody who's taking the time to join us this morning, and for those who are online as well. I might just actually start by saying it just always floors me and humbles me, the people that I get to work with inside of GA, and not least Danni, who's here with me today, and the team that I can see in front of me. And they forgot to mention that you're a trained pilot as well, just to add pieces to it. And also, thank you very much, Trent, for that introduction. If I could use you again in the future, that'd be fantastic. Okay, so we've sort of set up a format here. I hope that it works. And what we'd like to do is invite you into a discussion and invite you into a broader frame of thinking about safety. And in many respects, safety is a broad church. And there are many different perspectives of what safety actually means to us individually and then organisationally. And I think the purpose of this talk is on two fronts. One is to open that up and to explore that, but also to look at that from a personal story for Geoscience Australia. And Geoscience Australia's story, and Danni and I are part of that today, and you're part of that in this discussion, actually started back in 2023. And fundamentally, it started with that fearless step of actually being genuinely reflective around what does safety look like inside of our organisation, and where do we actually need to strengthen and build this resilience for safety. And I think that's really important, and I'll probably emphasise it because fearless organisations forms part of this discussion, and it forms part of a contemporary approach to safety. The second piece, which is the other principle of this talk, is really around the scientific mindset. Because one of the core strengths of Geoscience Australia, obviously, is that it is a scientific community, and a core part of a scientific community is a curious mindset. It seeks to ask questions, and fundamentally that's what we're trying to do today is, what are the questions we want to ask of safety? What does that tell us, and what might we learn from that? Okay, well, look, I think first thing we're going to do is probably just explain our title. It might be a little bit contentious in some ways in saying, are we sacrificing safety? And I might just explore that in an audience participation way. So I might just ask everybody just put your finger up in front of you if you're comfortable to do that. Now, you're doing one of possibly three things right now. A, you're looking at your finger, and you're probably thinking, I probably should have cut my nails. B, you might be looking at somebody else's finger, and if in fact you weren't, you are probably now because I've just said it, and you're probably thinking that they should have cut their nails as well. There's a third layer, though, that we don't all do often, but we're all capable of. Keep looking at your finger, and I'd invite you to do now is as you look at your finger, take in the rest of the room while still looking at your finger. And it's a mindful exercise, and it's something I got taught very early on in my career around thinking about safety. Feel free to put your finger down. And the truth of the matter is that what we're talking about in safety is a human condition. And one of the human conditions of contemporary safety is that we will make mistakes. It's natural. We all have 180-degree vision, but in reality, we only actually look about 2 to 3 degrees of that at any one time. Only when we're hyper-focused, maybe if we ride motorbikes or if we're flying planes, might we be taking in all of that scope. But generally, on a regular basis, we're looking at what is not too much dissimilar to the width of your finger. If I use that as a metaphor in safety and what we're about to look at now, but for a good period of time in work health and safety, we've effectively been looking at the finger, which is in many respects compliance, a compliance framework. And I say that on the basis that when we look across the landscape in a moment and we look at the framework for safety, predominantly it has a compliance mindset to it. Now, there is nothing wrong with that. It's key and important to what we do. But for us to really truly embrace what's coming in safety and what safety might mean inside of a contemporary organisation, we've got to be able to make that span move 180 degrees. We've got to look at the periphery of that single finger. And throughout these slides, I encourage you to keep that curious mindset and keep that 180-degree perspective as we start to unpack some of the findings and our own findings through safety foundations. So, Danni, what comes to mind when you think of the term work health and safety?
I think generally speaking, the consensus would be hard hats and PPE, like the high-vis vest, your goggles, keeping the person physically safe, I think would be the general thought.
Yeah. And I might do an audience participation moment, just see if I can get any nods in the room. Do people kind of agree with that generally? Is that something? I'm seeing some general nods in the room. And that's natural and understandable that if we think about our systems for safety, they have been predominated on a controlled environment. If we think about PPE, if we think about controlling work conditions, most of that is focused around how we manage humans in that environment for their own safety and safety of others. Contemporary safety starts to really make us think about this term work as imagined versus work as done. Work as imagined is the kind of compliance mindset of our risk assessments, our operating procedures, our policies, our checklists, our take fives. These are all things that we use on a regular basis. And we've matured in the use of those as well, and they're still very relevant today in how we operate. But in many respects, they are work as imagined, because once we get to the actual operational end of that safety, then we're dealing with humans' interpretation of that. And when we step into that space, we need to start to understand items such as local rationale. Why does it seem normal to do what we're about to do or what we did on that day? No one sets out to injure anybody. No one sets out to injure themselves. People do get injured at work. And the key point of that is for us to understand not what was the single point there, but what were the conditions, what was the environment, why did that seem normal on that day? Because that will give us the true understanding of that gap potentially between work as imagined and work as done.
And as we're about to cover off, it's very focused on the physical well-being of the person and not so much of, the rest of the human, the mental side of things. So
yeah, and I think as we start to get into this now, we'll actually see that it's more than just a framework of work as imagined to work as done. But now when we start to look at this across internationally and across our own regulations in Australia and our own strategic strategy for safety, work health and safety, we're seeing a significant shift to really encourage and drive organizations to really dive much deeper to understand what does that work as done actually look like? And what are the systems that we have in place or need to have in place that will give us that insight and develop a learning organization? So we tend to cover four kind of broad aspects. The first one is just to establish the frame for what we're talking about here in terms of the landscape, and particularly the landscape in Australia for work health and safety. The second part is we're a scientific organization, is obviously to lean into some of the science that is informing this space, not least particularly in the field of psychology, what that might mean for how we understand the emphasis upon systems for human condition. We talk about human factors. I prefer to use the word human-centered, which really draws in that understanding that as humans, we operate inside of communities. Safety Foundations is the title of the project that Geoscience has undertaken in terms of its organizational transformation. It's in its first year of development, and we want to share with you some of the insights that we're gaining. What are those insights telling us about this approach to a contemporary field for safety? And then finally, we want to broaden that lens really out onto the peripheries. And I think we're going to take a journey to Indonesia and to India in this room and actually look at what does safety look like in communities that are vastly different to the spaces that we might operate in. But what might that tell us about how we think about safety? All right, so we're going to try and keep some geographical references as we go. And no presentation. And I believe, with Verity's in the room, that we might be the first non-geographical or scientific talk. So thank you very much for creating the space. But it wouldn't be right if I didn't show a beautiful rock face, and there will be a prize at the end for somebody who can tell me where this is. There's bound to be somebody in the room or online who's looking at this in a very different way to me. So to use that kind of idea of stratification and layers of the landscape, and it is important for us to establish why now, why are we having this conversation, and what is the importance of it, and what does it really mean for safety? I think it's fair to say before the 1980s, for those in the room who lived during the 1980s in Australia, it was a very different landscape. My brother came over, I'm in the sort of £10 pom category, to Kwinana in WA, to a mining sort of steelworks environment. As a child, I could run free roam around that site. I'm pretty sure I couldn't do that today. So, the context of legislation and frameworks, we're still really forming and still being informed by internationally as well through places like UK, New Zealand, and OSHA in America. The first probably key point for us is in 2011 when the Simplified Work Health, the Model Work Health and Safety Act was established. And a key part about that Model Work Health and Safety Act wasn't just about trying to bring a more coordinated organisation nationally to the way that we consider work health and safety laws and regulations, but it also fundamentally started to establish much more clearer sense of duties. And the notion of duties was already present legislatively, but predominantly at that time, the Model Work Health and Safety Act brought with it not only the laws, but it brought the regulations and the codes of practice. This three-tier system that is now really evolved and developed to where we are today, that really drives a deeper understanding of duties under that act.
It was the first real consideration of psychological safety. It was actually 2011. It was quite early on.
Yeah, and I think that piece is probably interesting in itself as well. We're in 2025 now, so we've had a good period of time with an awareness and understanding of psychological safety. But I think as we'll sort of see as we go through this landscape, that really it's probably only in the last 5 years that has significantly changed in the emphasis and what that understanding is. And it's a probably important point for us to keep hold of. 2018, the Boland Report and the National Review. It's the first national review of the Work Health and Safety Model Act. What the Boland Report really provided us was firstly that we were on the right road with the Model Work Health and Safety Act. The use of codes and regulations were helping and supporting and informing businesses and organisations in their duties, and it was providing a really clear direction in what those duties should look like in terms of actual work health and safety systems in the workplace. It also, though, still had challenges. One of those challenges was understanding this difference between controls of work. Many organisations like ourselves work with subcontractors, and those subcontractors work with subcontractors. Those duties are defined across those parties. But how do we share those duties, and what does control of work mean, and how does our system overlay another system? Created confusion. And in fact, even to this point today, there is still a very clear drive to get a greater understanding in the terms of the way that we plan and design work with contractors, because that is a critical part of where systems failure can occur. Danny, there was another important part, though, of the Boland Review.
Yeah, well, it's a huge consideration. We're moving away from what we can physically see in regards to the safety context. We can see if there is a hazard, we can see if people are harmed, and we're moving, it's now starting to move into the mental side, which is really hard to measure because you can't see that in most cases. Yeah.
And the Boland Review identified that the missing link here was that there were no specific codes of practice for psychological, or even now the term psychosocial safety. And those codes and the regulation, no clear regulation for it, was a significant gap to really understanding the other broader holistic understanding of work health and safety. Remember at this point the predominance of work health and safety has been in a physical domain, a physical controlling environment, controlling system. It's not specifically focused where we're about to head now. So 2001, a significant international landmark, really, in some respects, is the international standard 45003 for psychosocial safety, which was really recognizing what the primary needs would be in this non-physical dimension of safety. In quick succession, in 2022, we saw our work health and safety regulations update and our first clear regulation in this domain. 2023, we saw the amendment to the Work Health Safety Act and the amendment to penalties in the Act and the indexing of penalties. So again, raising a clearer line, demarcation line around these responsibilities and what it means if we don't prioritise these in the format of our work. And then finally, as recent as 2024, the Code of Practice. Now, when you look at that timeline across that stratification, it's clear to understand that we are still very much at the vanguard, the front wave of what is a fundamental shift in our landscape. If we've had 20, 25 years of a work health and safety framework, which has been predominantly focused around the physical environment and to a greater extent has focused on a compliance framework, we're now moving to a space where it's a non-physical environment and there is a greater predominance on collaboration and consultation. Understanding what collaboration and consultation means and how we investigate that inside of our systems is a key part of our work and something that we will look to unpack in this talk.
A really good part is a whole of government in Australia are going through this transition altogether. So there is a lot of community within APS. So we get to catch up and meet and figure out what are you doing differently? This is what we're doing. So it's a real community around this whole transformation, which is actually really exciting. And of course, not to mention all the research that's happening as well.
Yeah, look, and I would even go as far as to say the regulators themselves are really sort of taking a clearer step now. You know, we ourselves are going through a proactive engagement. If we look back to 2011, proactive engagement wasn't necessarily the strategy, and it's a relatively new strategy. And it's a different way of working with us because unlike the more physical format for doing audits and reviews, this is more of a collaborative investigation with an organization to understand where we can build strength and where the gaps might be, because in many respects, we're all learning in this space of how we approach this in our systems. So let's lean into the science a little bit. And in fair, you know, we have 40 minutes here, and there is a vast body of science that is building around this. So we're going to be specific and maybe pick into some key components of that science. But to give a sense of that, if we look at the work of, for instance, Amy Edmondson's work around the Fearless organization since the late 90s to now really, in some respects, ahead of its time at the point of that research was building. And Amy's work was really focused around the critical nature of interpersonal relationships, interpersonal risks, and how do organizations establish those interpersonal risks? What are the conditions? What is the environment that we create where people feel comfortable and safe to speak up? And speak up culture is now part of our common vernacular today, currently. So if we think back from where Amy Edmondson started to look at to where we are now, we can see that there's been a predominant emerging core theme here, which is not around the environment, the physicality of the workspace, but around the leadership and what does leadership mean in that workspace, but then also around community as well and understanding the human condition.
Yeah, and there is, it's come out a clear delineation between psychosocial safety, which is the comfortableness in the workplace, and also psychology, where the speak up culture comes into it. So they've delineated that and really have identified, and which we'll go into, a few key areas that really affect people in the workplace.
And I've picked onto Dr. Vanessa Cook and Anthony Gibbs' work, and I'd encourage anybody in the room, if you haven't read this work, to go and explore that. Extensive study, over 20,000 individuals, 9 countries, 5,000 face-to-face interviews over a longitudinal period. So a really informed piece of research. High level, fundamentally, what did they identify in that? Well, they identified the core things that in many respects that Amy speaks to as well, which is there are sort of 2 dimensions to safety. One dimension is the physicality in the environment. It's the system that predominates at the moment. The second dimension is the leadership and the culture and environment, or the safety culture, safety climate. And if you're not familiar with the term safety culture, safety climate, I think Safe Work Australia has a really good way of defining this, which is safety culture is almost like the personality of the organization. It's the attitudes and behaviors. Safety climate is the emotional content of an organization. It's how we feel at a given time around our organizational environment and the systems that are in place to support us. Climate can obviously, like the natural environment climate, can change on a regular basis, and there are many conditions that can affect that. Safety culture is something that can become embedded over a period of time, and obviously something that needs to have a broader strategy to build and strengthen the parameters, the conditions that would support that. But going broader, if we look at the Lancet report, post-COVID report, in terms of medical awareness internationally, what the place of health has in the workplace, that's been a critical insight to understand that actually we're now looking at work as a major contributing factor to reduce the burden on health. In simple form, we're saying that workplaces could become environments that actually create conditions that create us in a more healthy lifestyle. The Australian Work Health and Safety Strategy, the 10-year strategy that we're in now, and if you look there, we can see that that has a clear focus from how do we do work health and safety to why do we do work health and safety. It's a clearer demarcation to go, let's go deeper in this curious nature of questioning the core conditions that actually create a safer environment. And if we go even broader out, and some current global research from South Australia University around the National Policy Index and the link in with the International Labour Organization, looking at a much broader international level, what are the frameworks that will actually further emphasize the importance of this work as we shift from a work health and safety sort of nominally compliance framework to one of a community and cultured framework for safety that really emphasizes consultation and collaboration.
On the next slide, you can see we've got some fantastic research, and there's a study that uses the SF12 is a short form survey, and there are 12 questions that are grouped into two areas, and it's the physical health, being pain, mobility, physical limits, and then of course the mental health. So it really delineates the two. There was a study that was 1,855 aircraft manufacturing workers, and they were demonstrating that job control, job demands, and social support were in the top 20% of their satisfaction at work. So some of the components we've got listed here on the screen within that survey around the freedom of the bodily pain, general health perception, mental health, and so on. The structures and fairness at work came across as the most significant within that research, which was really interesting. I think it really demonstrated now with the delineation between the body and the mind, how much the mind actually impacts people's quality at work. So it's pretty cool stuff. So we've got another one which it's called HR Qual, and it's the health related quality of life, which was the study that included this 12 survey components, the SF12. It's fascinating stuff.
And Danny, if I understand right, the significance of this study was really around the applicability of this across a demographic range. So
yeah,
there were some key factors, regardless of the environment and conditions, that kept on coming up.
Which is these three here: the decision latitude, job demands, and social support. They were in all of those that were surveyed, these three kept coming up as majority.
And if we just unpack those for a moment, social support, job demands, decision latitude, where do they land when we think about psychosocial safety and the code of practice?
Yeah, so there are 12, I believe, 10 to 12 main hazards when it comes under the code of practice, and these three are the most prominent. So if you do nothing else and you address these three, you're already off to a really good start.
And when we think about that in terms of a safety system, what does social support actually mean?
Well, it's a community, just like I was saying with APS, when we're all trying to figure out this landscape, this changing landscape. A sense of community helps you do that a lot better. So we here at GA have created a community within GA as well. We've got an engagement program that's coming up, and there's different ways: health and safety reps, HDCOs, and we're building communities within a greater community to navigate this landscape.
Some of the other ones, like job demands, I mean, you know, if you think about your own role, like we're not always in control of the flow of work. How do we tackle that? How do we operate with that?
Yeah, well, having open discussions with your manager as well. But job demands is really important because you get to really discuss about what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Now, it's how people turn up to work. So you can have work impact the human, but also outside impacts how you show up to work as well. So time pressures, stress, fatigue even can affect somebody within the workplace. So
yeah. And I was looking at the Safe Work Australia Psychological Health Safety Report 2024, and it notes that even though there's a declining trend in traumatic fatalities, I think they got 19% over the last decade. The rise in serious claims for mental health conditions represents about a 97.3% increase. In fact, on average, it's moved from 6.4% to 10.5% over a 10-year period. So it's a significant. It almost seems like that the controls or measures or framework we have in place for the sort of physical risk, in some respects, are working, maybe plateauing to a degree. But what we're seeing is that the measures that we may have in place and controls or strategies for the non-physical side are not working.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've always been there. It's more about an understanding now and figuring out different ways. It's trial and error, figuring out different ways to support the whole human, if you will.
And, if we look at physical, still predominantly vehicles fall from heights, hit by moving objects, still some of the key elements for traumatic incidences. Yeah. If we look at the mental health, then it's harassment, bullying, work pressure or anxiety-induced stress, and operational violence, obviously, for those who operate in domains or terrains.
Yeah, well, they're correlated. So you think if somebody turns up to work and they're stressed, maybe going through personal issues, they're not sleeping well, and they turn up to work, the physical impact on that can, well, they're correlated. So if you're operating machinery, yet you're depleted already when you turn up to work, your likelihood of an accident has significantly increased.
Yeah. And I guess back to that kind of national policy index and looking at the frame over this, the average time is around 7.2 weeks. It's 5 times more the time that would be to recover or return to work from a physical-based injury. On average, about the compensation rate is around $65,000 a year, something around $6 billion a year in costs. So there's a significant component here for industry to be able to look at and understand how we shift our systems.
Yeah, so it's not just about the regulation. The regulation is very important. It serves its purpose, but there is so much more to doing work. You're looking after your people, and your people then can, it saves you money as well. It saves you in workload building up if your people are off work. So it's twofolded. But we could talk about research for days, but we don't have that kind of time.
Okay. So just, I guess, to round that piece out, I think it's a really important piece here. Danni, I don't know if you can explain just this contributing factor piece.
Yes, in this particular context, it's talking about that these characteristics represented 47% of the overall issues that, when surveyed these people, that it was just shy of half, which is really interesting.
So core key principles that the system is looking at, and I'm probably emphasising it because we're going to come back into these in a minute when we look at our own work. So safety foundations, let's kind of talk about that a little bit. We're all directly involved. I can see team members here who are directly involved in that as well. How do we navigate this landscape? So keeping on the kind of science piece, there's some principles that we become very clear, and we can see them daily in our work. I don't know if you want to sort of speak.
Yeah, so in aviation, as we discussed, is my background, this is very important, and this is where a lot of it comes into play. So with Rasmussen's drift, it demonstrates that we have this margin of error, and we like to keep that as fat, as wide as possible. And that means if you're having a bad day, you're sleep deprived, the equipment's failing, we call it the perfect storm, you've got a margin error that will protect you. Or for those who are familiar with James Reason's work, Swiss cheese, you've got a number of defences there that protect you from catastrophe. When those holes in the Swiss cheese all line up, that's when you have your worst day. So the idea is to keep that margin of error quite broad, but humans are inherently lazy. We like to take shortcuts, whether we realise or not. And if there is a quicker, easier way to achieve our outcome, we will find it. So when people find that, and it goes outside your SOPs, outside what you're trained to do, but yet nobody got hurt, so therefore it was okay, then you've now eroded part of your margin. And if that keeps happening and becomes the norm in the workplace, you've now got a very little buffer, which is really scary, because when you have your bad day, when the equipment fails and it's bad weather, the perfect storm, you've now gone so far over your margin that it's catastrophe, which I think is a really, really good message, but also very scary.
So to kind of keep this in the frame of science, I'm going to sort of keep it on that objective level. You mentioned James Reason's sort of Swiss cheese model, and people might be familiar with that notion that in some respects, the concept that might be a kind of a root cause, like a point, a line that you can move through. I think, to be critical, the contemporary perspective on this is that it's not so much that there is these things line up, but there are conditions that are developed, and that those conditions have factors that combine together to create a relationship. And as much as it looks sort of simple on Rasmussen's model here around how the conditions in an organizational levels affect the layers below and how the feedback works, so the learning works, to understand that. What they're also talking about, though, is this complex relationship. And I think this image might be a better way to see that. And you spoke to, where we might be inherently lazy, but also we naturally have heuristics. Our brains can't compute everything. It's not so much shortcuts. We may find things that we do repetitively. We normalize those things. You might call it hindsight bias if you think that nothing's ever happened, because every time you get in a car, you put your seatbelt on, I'm good to go. But we all know that that's not reality, right? Because every time we get in a car, we're a different person each day. So, but we've normalized these heuristics. The other part around this is to understand that this term that I used right at the beginning, between the line between work as imagined and work as done. Rasmussen's work talks about this drift to risk, this notion that if we're not mindful of this, if we can't have systems to see this, and remember, our systems to see this are in the humans and their ability to be able to speak to it, or be confident to speak to it, and actually see a value in doing that, i.e. in a learning environment. If we can't do that, then we're actually creating conditions where that normalization can drift. And that's the point where the critical failure may happen in the system. And that's a key component when we start to think about how we shift our thinking around safety systems so that it's more human-centered, so that we can actually really capture this. So let's talk about our approach and what we've learned in this. I think the first key thing is around meaningful engagement. We talk about safety business partnering. A natural approach would be to immediately, I guess, in some respects, start with the policies and procedures, start with the framework that sits over that, in many respects, start with the governance of the system. And just to be clear, we are doing that as well. But it's not the critical central point at first if we look at this from what we're learning from the safety systems. What we're learning is that safety is understood in the local domains of where it operates, the local rationale. What we have to be able to do is to spend time in those areas with those teams, with those key workers, who are often actually are SMEs in their own right in their work, and draw that knowledge out so that we can create a more efficient approach to how we think about safety. So safety business partners has been a key model, and I would say that in the last 12 months, we've seen significant gain for ourselves. If I think about our work with the HSRs, with the corporate citizens, HDCOs, SMEs across the business area, work up safety communities, these all form our community network. They all form part of what I call intel, because we're exchanging information, but we're also exchanging intel, which is insight and understanding around what actually works, what will work for me, how can I access this. We don't all use the same vernacular. There is a thing such as safety literacy, like in any environment, and many of us are still learning that literacy. And if we look at the safety landscape, we're being compelled to learn a new literacy as well. So how do we do that? And how do we do that in a way that people feel confident and trusted and supported as we undertake it? And I think that's the main focus. So we developed safety advisors, and the safety advisors purposefully has been to make sure that we're actively out in the community. And you'll see the reason why we've done that when we look broader than GA in a moment. What's our core focus? Well, our core focus is obviously navigating duties and understanding our roles in those duties. So traditional work health and safety in that respect, we can't lose sight of the frameworks that we're operating to and really understanding how do I contribute to these duties? What do I do in my role? But really what we're practicing is humble inquiry and learning from local rationale. And if you're not familiar with humble inquiry, it's that sort of starting point that says, that's really interesting, tell me more. Not why do you do this, or you do this in this way. It's a form of questioning that purposely seeks to draw out better understanding of that environment. And that's really the drive of what we're learning at this stage. What does that build? Well, we build a safety service around that. So again, often the workers imagine sort of frameworks are that we have procedures, controls, standard operating procedures, checklists, and that they are just operating. But people need support in that, and that's where the safety service component comes in. Also, the broader body, the broader community inform that because they are working and learning with it and adapting it, and that's what we need to draw into our system.
And it's important, we have these conversations, we've got these networks, and we've created a really good community here, which is fantastic. It's important to capture the data as well. As we know, data speaks volumes. So we're going through the process of getting a new reporting system, which is really good. And from that, we're going to get a lot of data, because we can have opinions, we can tell the execs, this is what the people are saying, but unless we can back it up with data, it's only half the picture. So, yeah.
Profiling our risks has been a key part of our consultation and understanding the context of safety and understanding that context, not globally, but also locally as well. Bridging practical applications and tools. We've really emphasized co-design working groups, and they've been really successful for us in understanding some key core areas, particularly if I think about the fieldwork and co-designing fieldwork and the types of tools or resources that the teams may need to support them in that work. The real answers to those have come out of the co-design working groups. Key part about that is making sure it's accessible. Threshold tools is another key part that we've started to adopt. And that's not just having protocol that says you do X, Y, Z, but also providing tools that allow the front line of this to make decisions and judgments around the conditions that exist for them and what might be the right appropriate action to take, and giving them clarity on that protocol is a key part. And it's something that we are seeing emerging across the work health safety industries. And then finally, strengthening community networks, as I've mentioned already, a key emphasis and focus has been around our collaboration. And we've just come out of our discovery stage. We're just in our development stage. And a key part of that still is collaborating on how we refine the tools and resources that we're implementing into the system. And then the last part, and I know there's people in the room and online as well who may play these roles, and I just want to say thank you so much for what you do in that space, because the corporate citizen model has been really critical, I think, to a really good practice about how you might start to embed this. And I'm going to lean on that a little bit in a moment when we step outside of GA. All right, so we're on the kind of home straight here in our sort of 40-minute run. We want to sort of be on the far edge of this now, and we want to sort of step outside of what is maybe conventional.
Yeah, well, we talk about the communities that we have here in Australia, but there are so many communities and different versions of that have a lot of history that are a lot more simplistic, but just as powerful. And there's one that I really like, and it was with this, it's a small tiny island off Sumatra in Indonesia, and it was fascinating. So they had a really big earthquake, and if you remember, it was in Banda Aceh, and from the earthquake came a tsunami. This community, there was a lot of people that perished in that example. And there was one, actually, it was a 1907 tsunami that devastated the island. From that experience, those are remaining and to today have created the Smong song, and it was telling a story through a song. And there's a really cute video of it where the families with their babies, they sing it to them at baby stage, and then through primary school and high school, and even the government's on board now. And what it does is essentially the translation is telling the story about if the earth shakes and the water recedes, go to higher ground. And that is the message that the people carry through. And then there was another massive earthquake in 2004, and there was 70,000 people on that island, and majority of them got up. There was less than 10 people that perished in that last example, and they put it down to communicating this message that everybody learns from birth, essentially.
So if I understand that right, no mobile phones, no emergency apps, no satellite phones. How many people did you say?
There was 70,000 people on the island in 2004.
Who had a conscious understanding of thought to act at the right time appropriately.
They knew exactly what to do.
And that was built by what?
Sharing this message through song, through storytelling. It's powerful. It's so simplistic, it makes it beautiful.
When we come back to community, we come back to collaboration, and I think about the journey we've had the last 12 months, what are we, and I'm looking at my team here, what are we constantly hearing? It's stories. We're constantly being given stories. We don't get it in factual. We get it in the feeling and emotive side of what this looked like, felt like.
Yeah, well, you have an example of that yourself, don't you?
So I think there's a connection to this. So I recently was in India working and supporting a safety conference, and I call this a sort of the other side of safety. If you can look at that image for a moment and work out what's wrong there. And you'll see where the seatbelt is to where it should be. Now, I could look at that, and I did look at it immediately and go, well, that's not safe. But that's not being humble inquiry. That's not approaching local rationale. I've got to understand why. And when you live in a community that is, if you think about Pune, where I was visiting, over 5 million people live in Pune.
Did you ask why?
I'll come back to it. Over 5 million people live in Pune. I think Horton, New South Wales is something like 8 million. If you look at that compared to Canberra. So the context and the dynamics is radically different. We've got to remember there's no work health and safety framework. There is work and safety laws, but no broader framework. There's no regulators. It's not the same world that we operate in. But does that make it any less safe? And I'd actually probably say no, it doesn't. And there's something important for us to understand and learn in that. And I want to emphasize that as we round up here in this group of ladies that I met, which for me were the epitome of contemporary safety. And I want to just sort of set the scene briefly. Menstrual literacy and health in their community is a significant risk. Young people die on a regular basis from poor health due to menstrual literacy and access to that.
It's a taboo topic, wasn't it?
It's a taboo topic. There is patriarchy. There is risks that individuals play in speaking up around what the needs are. These ladies are part of a grassroots organisation called Project Saksham, and I encourage you again to explore that. They've been running 2 to 3 years, and they act as what are called community mobilisers. They go out across their community, not too similar to us going out across our community, to seek to engage around understanding safety. And I worked with them, and I spent time with them in their community. And the one question I had afterwards was really just clear to me is, how do you start the conversation? I always use this term of the pointy end of the stick and the hand that holds it. Often our conversations go straight to the risk. And they said, no, we don't obviously start immediately talking about menstrual literacy and menstrual needs. What we do is we just broadly see if we can habitate the space with them in their kitchens. We may cook. We may just start a conversation, build trust and empathy. We might broaden that conversation then into health. And that conversation, after a couple of conversation meetings, slowly builds into something. And that's their methodology. Their methodology is so powerful that when I was there was a young boy who was 12 or 13, and there is an Indian festival ritual called Rakhi, where a brother and a sister give mutual respect to each other. While I was there, he gave his sister a menstrual cup. It was a significant step for him to be able to do something like that. Now, what hit me more in it was that he didn't only do that, but he chose to do that. And he felt confident to do that. He wasn't doing it to impress anybody else. It's because the real value of safety had hit home to him and what his role was in that safety.
That's huge.
I think there's a lot that we can draw from that. And I personally, in the professional career that we're in now, I draw parallels to how we're operating, and I draw parallels to how we think about work health and safety strategies and practices and what we put emphasis upon. Our journey, as I said, started in 2023, and we're still on that journey, but we are learning a lot at this stage. We're really gaining insight, and I think the key piece is we're starting to gain that sort of connective trust with those that we work with around a genuine approach to understanding safety. Okay, I'm going to round us out. So what are our key messages?
Well, stay curious. It's really important. Ask questions, don't presume, don't assume. If you want to understand how people are, you need to talk to them about it and create a safe space for that to happen.
Recognize the critical role of fearless leadership. We ourselves in GA have undertaken a leadership journey and framework in terms of values and approach, and that's a really great indicator of stepping in the right direction and really tackling the core element of contemporary safety.
And I also think the power of storytelling, as we've just highlighted in those two cases, like if you're trying to get a message across and you don't want to bore people, you can put it in the framework of a story. Here's an example. People remember that. I'd even challenge that most people here will remember that Pune story more than anything else we've said. It's powerful.
And I guess, to say that, we use the term safety talks, and we literally mean safety talks. It's not just a vernacular of a piece. If you really want to get to the heart of safety, you've got to get it talking. Yeah. And you've got to make that connection for people to be able to talk. If you don't do that, or you can't do that in an effective way, one of the risks that you run is the drift. Because the human condition of local rationale, hindsight bias, and normalizing deviation in a system are things that are now well known and researched and understood. They are our core elements that we try to mitigate. And I guess we all have a part in how we do that. And the starting point of that is really first to resonate with yourself and be safety curious around what's my role? How do I contribute to that?
Yeah, it's a great place to end. Great.
Wow. Thanks, Danni.
Paul.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.